Hi, my name is Cindy Siegel. I'm the chairman of the Harris County Republican Party, and this is Leaders on the Right. Today, I'm excited because my friend Bridget Wade, who's the trustee for District 7 for the Houston Independent School District. And Bridget, I met you first through your mother, and your mom is a longtime grassroots activist, Penny Butler. And she actually, wasn't she the committee woman for the state of Texas to the RNC several years
She
ago?
was. She was the Republican National Committee woman for the state of Texas. I remember when she was campaigning for it.
Yeah, and then she also was very active in working on Kay Bailey Hutchison. I think she told me one of her first campaigns. So you grew up kind of watching, I guess, all the campaigning and political arena and what was going on. But was HISD, when you ran for that a few years ago, was that your first political office that you ran?
It was my first political office, my first attempt at running for any kind of political office, and obviously successful. And it was wonderful. I would do it again in a heartbeat, and was glad to be able to participate in this great opportunity that is a citizen getting involved.
So you have kids. How many kids do you have?
We have 3 children, grown, and one grandson.
Oh, congratulations.
Yes. And so they're all grown and graduated from college and working, thank goodness, on their own.
What made you decide, of all the political offices, what made you decide to run for HISD, the school board?
Cindy, if you remember when I looked into running, we were it was a COVID situation going in education, but most importantly, I was watching over and over and over again HISD, mostly the board of trustees, acting poorly, publicly, behind the scenes. Not only that, we were seeing corruption happen, and we were seeing students failing, and our schools continuing to. I was driving around seeing our schools, the grass not being mowed, just all of the things that go on that are important to the city's foundation, and that is the grassroots of our education system. So I said, enough's enough. I've had it watching this, and so I'm gonna get in.
So how did it differ when because you said your kids are grown through college, how did it differ when your kids were going to school compared to what you saw that sort of encouraged you to decide to run for office?
Well, I'm a public school. I went to public school. Our children graduated from a private school. In the end, I needed to change because I wasn't learning anything. So we then put our children in public school, the same elementary school in which I attended, and decided that it would be important that they have some neighborhood public school as well. They ended up going into private later, but I got very involved in, like my mother was when we were in school, very involved in the PTO, in the neighborhood association, and in all things involving that pathway for our family and our neighborhood and for our children. And so on that note, I was just always very active and learned to be active, like you said earlier, from the way my parents had raised us, that you can't sit around and wait for someone else to do it. So I just knew it was important. And so I thought, what's coming up? And that election was coming up, and I thought that would be really an important thing to do. So,
do I recall right that you were actually, weren't you president at one point on some of the local PTOs?
I was president of our local PTO at Briar Grove Elementary School, and we rebuilt the school. The streets were being redone during that. We had to redesign carpool. We had to do a lot of things that were bigger than just the regular job those years because of the nature of we'd work with the district a lot on some projects. So I was very in tune to the way things work, but that was even when things were functioning in a lot higher quality than more currently.
You've been on the school board for how long now?
Year and a half.
Okay. And of course, everyone is, I think you have to be living in a hole if you're unaware that the TEA, right?
TEA.
The Texas Election
Education
Agency has taken over HISD. And I'm going by just what I've read in the paper, but it was my understanding, if I recall right, that it got to a point where y'all said, we can't keep fighting it. Is that right?
That's
so
right.
Can you explain to people sort of what it is, what the process is? I mean, is there going to be a new school board election? You know,
I'll give you all of the background. So this TEA takeover started to evolve in about 2018. So this is not a new thing. That this has been on the books for a while. What was happening where there's a law, a House bill, 1842 House bill, and it basically says 5 years, consecutive years of a failing school can then deliver a state takeover. And or you're under conservatorship for some other reasons, which we were as well. We were also under conservatorship for special education because we've been failing in special education. And we'd also had corruption and malfeasance in the district when it comes to the financials, big time issues. So there were many things going on. Well, an addendum was made to that House bill, which was basically the House bill says that the state can come over and take over that district because of that 5 year parameter. That was it, and that was a bipartisan bill. So they made an amendment that you could take those school that was failing and you could either close it or you could give it to a charter or a university partnership. You could do a partnership and they would take over the managing of that school. So fast forward, the citizens were mad and didn't want it. The teachers unions especially did not want it. And the school board was not functioning well and decided to vote against the opportunities the state offered to make right and keep us out of TEA or Texas Education Agency's takeover. So they had exhausted, the board members who were willing to work with the state had exhausted all their opportunities because the rest of the board would not move. Therefore, sending it back and forth to the courts and lawsuits, and it just now came to the Texas Supreme Court, who then decided to give it back to the lower courts, and then therefore the takeover. So there were a lot of things happening that were in our control until they no longer were in our control.
it's not all the schools that are failing.
No. In fact, I want to speak well of a lot of schools. We have so many great schools, amazing teachers, amazing principals, and we have kids that graduate from HISD that do remarkable things. So I never want to take away from the great things that are going on. But I do know that there was enough things that were going on that are not, they're just not the best for the majority of kids.
So do you guys have a role with now that there's this takeover and a new group? Are you guys still involved as trustees or no?
So we still hold what's called the elected role. I still have to fill out paperwork and submit. I'm still under all the guidelines that you have to be under as an elected official. But I am not privy to any of the information. We're not in the meetings. I mean, I can go and attend as like a regular civilian, but besides being a help if the board of managers reaches out, that's pretty much it.
And how long do you think that board of managers will be?
It's a minimum 2 year takeover. which means there has to be results in that 2-year period, which we'll see. Then it is a roll back on. So a trustee, but what happened is board of managers would roll off, a few of them, and trustees who are currently elected would roll back in. So not all elected officials would roll right back on. So I would still be, if it were just 2 years, I would still be an elected official, and I would then have the opportunity to roll back in to that position. And then as elections happen, they would roll in. Yes.
So, and again, my kids like yours are grown now. So I go by what I read in the newspaper, hear on the news. And then talking to friends who have young children in schools, I think a lot of us and a lot of parents sort of opened up their eyes when COVID happened and your kid was stuck at home and the parents were stuck at home. And for the first time, I think a lot of parents actually were seeing what their kids were learning or not learning in school. And I think that's where a lot of parents became concerned. And then I read where that COVID year or so that, and it's not just HISD, but I think it's pervasive across the country, that these kids, their scores, their reading and their math scores declined dramatically. And where I'm going with that, I guess, is, you or I think with our kids, we would have the resources, we would have the education to be able to sit down and, well, I might not be able to help them with their calculus or math these days, but, hopefully I could. It's to some response. But, there are a lot of families where they don't have the financial resources. Their parents are working 2, 3, or 4 jobs. Maybe their children don't have the laptop or the internet. So how does a school, and how do the parents help their kids get back up to speed? I mean, what do you think it's even possible for these kids to recover that year? Because I've worried about these kids thinking some of those kids will never get back on track.
You're right. They won't.
So is HISD doing anything? I mean,
so we know
what
the
resources
most effective. We know that the most effective, or the 2 most effective answers, and we know this through the data, and we know this through the funding, and we know this through the outcomes. Period. And that is 1, attendance, getting kids back on regular attendance in the same school, and then we know that tutoring. So even if it's small group or one-on-one. And so a lot of funding was misused or not well allocated. All the COVID funding that came in to education. So out of the funds that were left over, what they found out was that one-to-one tutoring or even small group tutoring. So a lot of schools, smart schools, or a lot of districts made that a priority and really focused in on how do we get kids that face-to-face time to get some makeup done. And that's happening without having for parents to have to, put out their personal funds or that has been extremely effective, but it's really getting kids to school. And so much, we have lost thousands of children, which is just tragic. But kids stopped coming to school. So we know that was the other critical milestone that has to happen. So for parents, getting their kids back, Cindy, if they can't read by 3rd grade, it's pretty much a downhill from there. So with that said, it's really important for these young ones. And parents can, if you're 1st or kindergarten through 3rd grade, most parents have some ability to give their kids help at those lower level learning. And just by reading a book or just being present with them while they're studying. It's important.
So I was sort of laughed to myself. I had read in the newspaper, and it's with the new, what do they call the guy who was brought in to manage the
9 miles.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, he's the superintendent.
Okay.
Appointed.
And they were talking about some of these schools that they were going back to teaching reading by sounding out phonetically. And I sort of laughed because, I mean, that's how I learned, and I don't really understand why we got away from it. So I guess if I'm a parent listening to this, I've got young children, I know that there's a tendency, and you hear this, like you said, by third grade, after that, they just the public school system passes them through and just promotes them when they don't really have the skill set. What, is there a possibility that they can get caught up and that they can get back on track? I mean, if I'm a mom out there, single mom, or both my husband and I, or grandmother, whatever, what can I do to get my kid back on learning the basics? Because to me, that's what the school should be doing, giving our kids these skills that they can go out and they can go through high school. They don't all have to go to college. I don't think that's necessary.
Great.
I've got a nephew who's not going to college and went to community college and became a construction manager and is doing quite well. But if you don't know how to read, and if you don't know how to write, reading, writing, and arithmetic, and do basic math, how do you get along in the world?
If you can't read, can't fill out an application. I mean, you can't read the menu. We know that you can't do math if you can't. So, and obviously writing then becomes, it's a leg of that stool. So, Cindy, I think that, I never want to underestimate kids and their ability to catch up. So I don't want to write kids off. But we know that just the basic data says exactly what you said, is by third grade. And when you go back to the phonetic learning, they've known this. So let me give you a little history, and this is, there's actually a podcast, since we're talking about podcasts, and NPR did it, and it came out about February. It's called Sold a Story. And it is exactly about what happened in education that is why we are in the current state that we're in. It gives you, it's about a 5 or 7 episode, I guess, worth listening to. It's fantastic. But it basically talks about what happened. And so when some certain educators decided then that they wanted learning to be more fun, reading to be more fun, or they thought kids could learn in a different way. And so they decided to pursue this other way of teaching reading, and basically it's guessing. You know the letter, you know the general idea of the story, you see the picture, and therefore you can make an educated guess what that word might be. So that was the general idea behind it. And for some kids, it might have been okay. But for a majority of the kids, that's what they were doing. They were just guessing. So instead of the phonetic process. So that came in vogue and it was the big thing to do. And so all teachers went out to all these seminars and learned that style of teaching. When Bush came in and put out the No Child Left Behind, and this is from the Republican side of the story, he decided that it was going to push the phonetic reading again. That was going to be, and that's one reason why Texas sort of had it more than other states, some other states, even though we don't really perform that well educationally. But because it was George Bush and because it was a Republican who had decided that we were going to focus on back to phonetic learning, there was pushback with the unions, and they supported this other style of learning, pushed back even more against the phonetic learning that we know is the successful way for kids to learn to read. So that's a little nutshell of a history behind why it's lasted this long.
Well, I'll tell you, I remember my oldest, I think it was fourth grade, was doing some long division, multiplication, and then they had her doing these ladders or lattice work, and she was spending all of her time drawing lines that were super straight. And I kept going, no, you need to do it this way, because when it comes time to take your PSAT or SAT or in college, you're not going to have time to draw these pretty little lattice work. And I thought at that point it was like totally we're missing the mark. So sort of changing it a little bit, what surprised you when you got on HISD? You hadn't been served in public office, you'd been a mom, you'd been PTO president.
I've been very involved in a lot of different boards and a lot of different activities around all kinds of civic.
But now you're in the public domain, so to speak, as an elected official. What was there anything that you just went, just thought was crazy or were shocked by it?
I'll give you two sides of that. The surprise and the frustration happens when you watch other trustees of the nine, there are 9 trustees, and you watch other trustees continue to behave badly. And you can't believe that adults that are supposed to be responsible for the education, for the leading in decision making for the education of our children and their future, and to see them behave so poorly. And that was, to me, the most, and still is, the most disappointing part of it. On the other hand, I would say the rewarding part of it has been the engagement with the people, learning to get to hear so many sides of the coin, getting to hear the heart of the people that you serve. And Cindy, you know this so well. If anyone, you know this better than anybody. And that is that serving the people and having to listen to things that maybe you don't always agree with, but you have to listen to it and you have to take it seriously and say, how do we make good decisions that can help impact their point of view and their concerns, and do it strategically, because what we were doing is making decisions that are important for generations of children. I mean, kids are only in their education for only 12 years, so we've got to do the best we can while we have it. So.
Well, and you're right. I mean, I served on Bel Air City Council for 14 years. And the first city council that I was on for the first 2 years was extremely divisive. And it's very easy, I think, to get caught up. And I think we see that today across the country in all levels of government, to get caught up in, this me versus you and the egos getting involved versus really remembering that what your mission is. And in your case, it was to educate our kids to the best of our ability and give all of them an opportunity. And I think we forget that it's called a public servant for a reason. You're supposed to be a servant of the public. And that said, again, if I'm a parent out there and, I want to advocate for my kid, and I do believe, there's a tendency, and I've been guilty of it, that you don't want to be that parent. Like, oh, there comes Mrs. Siegel again. She's always, raising hell over her kid, or her kid's, perfect and can't get into trouble. But, the way I always approached it is I didn't want to be that parent. But the other hand, a good friend of mine said, Cindy, if you don't stand up for your kids, who's going to stand up for them? So is there a piece of advice that you would give a parent out there, that if they see something with their kid, and this is true of public school as well as private, and it can be it's not every kid is flunking out. It can be that you have a kid that's, of course, we all think our children are genius, but your kid is super bright and, is still not getting the challenges. There's all sorts of needs that our children have. Is there a piece of advice that you would tell the parent as a mom and as a grandmother and as a board member? What would your advice be to them?
Well, like to your point exactly, you know your child best, and you are your child's best advocate. So you can advocate for whatever, like you said, to whatever's going on. If they're not getting enough in their education, or if they're falling behind, if they have special needs that are being addressed, and we see that all the time. And I was always amazed by how many parents are that, whether or not, doesn't matter what kind of socioeconomic or what kind of language barriers, the parents would come in force to stand up for what they needed for their children. And so that was always what amazed me about people, is that no matter what the situation, when it came to their kids, they were all in 100%. And so I think every parent, we have choice in education in Houston. We have a lot of great schools. You can have your child moved. You can, realign this to the better school that meets your child's needs. And there are channels to go through to make for a better. And it's not easy, but it's there. So I would not stop and just assume that what you have is all you can get. So that's my best advice.
Changing a little bit.
Okay.
Are there any future political offices you're thinking about doing?
As it stands, right now I'll stay with what I'm doing because I believe in it so much. I'm open to the possibilities of something else come that time or the right occasion. But right now I don't, I'm real happy with serving in this role because I do think we are at such a valley. I'd like to see the hill get climbed. And so that's kind of where I am right now. But Cindy, I'm open.
So we'll wrap it up. And to wrap it up, is there any story, something that someone said, a parent or child, that just sort of touched you and reached out to you? I mean, I'd get a thank you note, or someone would say something where you felt like you helped, that it sort of made all the other times when people were complaining or not getting along.
It's a very good way to lead it. Yes, I had, we get thousands of emails, and it was so nice, especially when it was just kind of constant, harping on something. And then you get that email, just thanks for hearing me. Thanks for responding. No other trustee would respond to me. I would have people from other districts reach out to me because they said they weren't getting any response from their own trustee. So I felt like no matter if I agreed with people or not, I was always about responding. People would call me or email me and say, thank you for what you've done. I could not have appreciated that more. That's all the bow that you get on the package of a hot mess.
Yeah, I agree. Well, Bridget, thank you.
Thank
and
you so
I
much.
really do hope in 2 years that we still see you up there, because I do believe that it's so important to have people, particularly for our kids, that will be an advocate for them, that it's not about their ego. Because the reality is our children are the future of our county, our city, and especially our country. And we all want to do better by our children. And the reality is, it's the education. A good education is the great equalizer, and it's the way that all of us rise up. But thank you.
Thank you, Cindy.
And I hope you all will join us next week at our Leaders on the Right podcast. Thanks.